Okay, so good afternoon. I'll just say welcome to everybody very briefly. And then we'll, I gotta admit some more folks here, just a sec. Okay, so again, welcome to everybody. We'll go around and do some real quick introductions. So here in the room, Carla McLean, planning official, City of Boardman.
Debbie Rady, Boardman Foods and Families First Childcare.
And then Mario, you want to introduce yourself real quickly?
Yeah. Hi there, I'm Mario Sabota, and I am going to be doing some filming for a project that we're working on for the city. Nice to meet you all.
Yeah, so I don't know how, there's just two of us in the room. I don't know how good the video will be today, but just briefly, Mario is working with us to do a video project to kind of showcase all of the planning work we're doing. So he's here to help with that today. So let's go around the participants from Zoom. So Gary, I'm going to start with Gary Reddick. Just a quick name, who you're with, and
Gary Reddick, architect based in Portland, doing work around the state, and I've had a few meetings recently at Boardman, and I'm just here hoping to learn more about the area in general and some of the aspirations that you all have. Thank you.
And then let's do Jennifer. Are you muted, Jennifer?
Sorry, can you lay down? Lay down.
Okay. Where is Jennifer? Jennifer's not responding. I'm guessing that's oh,
did I get it? Okay.
There.
I'm not smart with this. Jennifer Layton, Planning Commission.
Thanks, Jennifer.
Yeah.
Let's see. Let's go ahead and go with Brendan.
Hi, everyone. I'm Brendan Bucko at Johnson Economics, part of the consulting team on this project.
Matt.
Howdy, Matt Hasty, also with MIG, also part of the consulting team. And I will give you a heads up that I may need to drop off early. So apologies, but you'll be in good hands with Andrew Parrish, who can introduce himself next.
Okay, Andrew, got passed off to you.
All right. Good afternoon. Andrew Parrish with MIG, part of the consulting team, doing a lot of the kind of mapping work for this project.
And then I think I'm down to Ryan. And then I think with that, I have everybody online.
Yeah, hi, I'm Ryan DeGroff. I work for Business Oregon. I cover 4 counties out here in Eastern Oregon, including Morrill.
Perfect. Okay. So, Brendan, I'm going to just pass it back to you and let me know what you need from me and when you need it.
Okay. Thank you. Can you enable sharing on your end?
Yep, I can do that.
Just going to put up some slides to help us talk through what we are going to do today, but thanks everyone for being here. We are this is our second meeting. We were out there, Matt and I, in late March to do sort of a kickoff meeting and then do a tour around the city of buildable lands with Carla. And so what we are doing today, if I can get this ready. There we are. What we're hoping to do today is just do a project update, and then we have some sort of draft findings and the some of the technical work to start talking about. I'll be talking about the employment profile and forecast the future employment, and then Andrew will be talking about the draft land inventory, and we'll start kind of going over maps of the employment lands that are available. And then if we have time, get into just an introduction of what some of the strategies and findings might be coming out of this process, just to start getting our thinking going on that. So as we get started, I was hoping that Carla could give an overview of all of the planning efforts that are going on. We're just one part of it being the economic opportunities analysis, but there's a ton of parallel planning tracks going. So I thought it might be helpful if Carla could start with an update of where we're at on these various things.
Sure, glad to. So the strategic planning part of this has been finished. Meg assisted us as a kind of an add-on to this project, the EOA project, to kind of front load it, ask the community some questions about where are we at and where do we see ourselves in the future. We did some great survey work. And what came out of that was kind of 5 community goals. And I can't rattle them off the top of my head. And they focus on housing and loosely on parks, on transportation, on kind of the need for retail and better commercial here locally. So those 5 goals have been really embraced by the council. It's kind of funny because this morning got pulled into the council chambers with a conversation about how do we memorialize those 5 new goals in the council chambers. So we have the city's mission and vision up in there, and now we're going to add the 5 strategic goals. So it's kind of exciting from that perspective. I'm going to jump around on that list a little bit. I'm kind of go by date order or date completion order. Parks Master Plan. We're going to have our final community meeting actually next Tuesday, the 13th. We should have a final Parks Master Plan this summer for adoption. And that is a collaborative effort with both the city and the park district. We're looking at all of the assets that we have collaboratively from both systems. Excited about that. It's an update for the district. Their current plan was written in 12, and so it's kind of out of date at this point in time. It'll be the first Parks Master Plan for the city. I think what I've learned in this is that the parks have just kind of been an ancillary thing, and I think there's a real commitment to making it a more integral part of what we do. The next in line to be adopted or concluded is this one, the economic opportunities analysis. So I won't say a lot about that. That'll be late summer, early fall. And then from a next in line is the transportation system plan. It is slated at this point in time to conclude right around Christmas time. Much needed. And then comes the comp plan and development code updates, which a lot of these will kind of feed into that process. It's underway now. It's slated to wrap up a year from now, April, May. The housing needs analysis, what I'm learning is it won't be called a housing needs analysis, most likely by the time we actually get there. It will be a housing capacity analysis. But either way, we're going to try to figure out what we need to do relative to residential lands. Because the state is doing rulemaking, we have not fully engaged on that particular project, but it looks like we should be able to start that in January of 26. Be ready to rock and roll when the rules are adopted. So we're busy. It's a little crazy making to do all of this at the same time. But I think for the most part, we have aligned most of these inputs so that they are kind of landing in the right way and be able to fully inform the comp plan and development code update, the housing needs analysis, and some refinement on the transportation side of things will cause some future small amendments to the comp plan development code once updated, but they should be minor amendments at that point in time. So yeah, I'm happy to answer any questions, but we're having a lot of fun with that.
I have one question on the Parks Master Plan. I didn't realize how much the county actually plays a role, like with this heritage trail and stuff. Is that part of this too, or is that completely separate?
So the Heritage Trail is a county function. They adopted the first concept plan back in the late 90s, 2000, and it runs basically from county line to county line, east to west along the river. And not much has happened with that facility. There is some signage out there. It's mostly a social trail. But they are in the process. It's kind of interesting because we're both kind of doing this almost simultaneously, and we didn't really plan it that way. They are converting their concept plan into a master plan. And we are working on this parks master plan. And so we're trying to make sure that when we adopt, we have as much information from their plan as possible to inform ours. And we're trying to provide them as much pertinent information so that we started out kind of in our own separate worlds. We're trying to communicate a little better as this goes through the process. One of the things they're doing with the Heritage Trail is realigning it to potentially, instead of going along city and county roads, to actually go under the BPA lines from Main Street to the west. There's some ownership and some other hurdles with that, but we will conclude our Parks Master Plan before they finish their master plan for the Heritage Trail. So it doesn't all align perfectly, but there has been some good sharing of information.
And so the follow-up question is the river. The river is such an important tourism and economic vitality here to our region. And so who would be the entity for like a terminal for these cruise ships coming up, or people to dock, things, bigger things, or have tourism a part of that?
So that kind of river infrastructure is a port asset.
Oh,
And so it would really be the port who would be engaged, I think, in that conversation. That has not really emerged as a comment or a defined need as we've been working through the various pieces, but that's also an economic opportunity. And I think it would be appropriate to, have that conversation come up here about how do we address that as an economic opportunity.
thank you.
Yep.
Great. Yeah, I agree. I'm making note of that. That's certainly a big economic opportunity that we should make note of. So, are there other questions about all these planning efforts before we start digging into the economic piece? I don't think I see any hands.
I'll ask one more question, sorry.
Mhm.
Some community members, guess myself included, we're not really, planning, we don't really understand zoning to the extent that all of you may do. And so, when we look at the city of Boardman, and then we're looking at outside of city limits, right? And then we're looking at port property, and you've got county. And so is there like a map or something that's available to public people to kind of see what lands are available for all the different types of use, or bigger categories anyway? I don't know where a residential place might go in, or I'll just throw out Fred Meyer's, where would it even physically be able to go?
Good question. So I'll take that, and I'll let Matt or Andrew or Brendan respond as well. So the counties, sorry, I'm multitasking here. The county does have an interactive map that you can go and you can look at the county, and that interactive map shows you parcelization. It's on the county planning, so you can get to it from the county planning page. It has zoning for the county, does not have zoning for the cities. So there are some probably disconnects, if you want to look at working on an interactive map, but we're not quite there yet. When you start talking about where certain things can go, and then again, there's the port. Part of the port's in the city of Boardman, and part of the port is in the city's perspective or from the county's perspective. When you start talking about where things can go, generally, housing and commercial activities are viewed as urban uses and are mostly inside city limits. So when you start talking about a Target or a Fred Meyer, you see those inside a city. Oftentimes you see urban, industrial land more inside city limits. It's just been a kind of nature of how Morrow County started, why we see so much industrial land in the county. But a county's primary mission in land use planning is the protection of farm and forest land. Yes, there's a lot of kind of rural residential land in the north end of Morrow County, almost none in the south end of the county. So it's a really interesting to see how the different parts of the county have developed over time. But, having been a rural planner for so many years, my focus was really on kind of that protection of farm and forest land piece, approving non-farm dwellings or, those types of things. And now as an urban planner now for over 5 years, it's a real different focus. And it really is about installing, facilitating the installation of wet utilities and making sure that there's a density to be able to support the development of houses at a rate that's affordable, and then figuring out how you develop kind of those commercial lands and how do you entice people to come to your community to build whatever it may be, stores or hospitals or fast food restaurants, whatever it may be. So I don't know if that really answers your question, Debbie, but hopefully.
Seems like it hasn't been developed, but maybe it's working that way with what the county's done and what the city and port may have.
Yeah, and I think for a long time, Boardman was just kind of Boardman. And on the last 5 to 8 years, we've seen such an explosion in growth. And it hasn't all been consistent. We've seen this explosion in housing, but we haven't really seen a complementary growth on the retail side of things. And when I say retail, I really mean that in a real broad-based kind of perspective, not just about retail specifically, but retail meaning service businesses, true retail for items for sale, restaurants, food service. We've seen a lot of food pods and a lot of food trucks. It'd be nice to get a sit-down restaurant in Boardman. So those are the things that I think this process is designed to help us with, but also then figuring out just how do we move forward with encouraging those kinds of businesses, creating that connection between whether it be city staff or others in the area to help facilitate bringing those businesses to town.
One more question. I'm sorry, but does the city have a person like the port maybe, or that is focused on economic development? Is there you're kind of here doing this work, but is that your job?
So no, not as envisioned. The city had a position called Community Development Director for many, many years. It was held by Barry. Just let's be real clear. He did not do the functions of that in the way that most people look at that title and think what that job means. So no, the city has not had an economic or community development director that has been doing that kind of work where you're out kind of trying to plow those fields, so to speak, and create those opportunities. The city's talking about that very seriously. That came up in the conversation on Saturday when we had our outreach for the other project. And I think the city is trying to figure out how we go forward with the need to create that opportunity, how we do that economic outreach. But we also have in town the BCDA, and I think I need to better understand what their goals and objectives and mission is. Because when you look at their title, you think, well, that's what they should be doing, and yet I'm not sure that's always what happens. Chambers are really about business retention, not necessarily recruitment. So I think there is a missing component in Boardman that does get to that business recruitment component. And I think that's going to be, I do firmly believe that's going to be an outcome of this planning process that we do, that as we work to conclude all of this, the city really does need to kind of take that next step and begin that, figuring out how to do that business recruitment piece. Yep.
Great. Thank you. That's all good stuff. I was just going to add that we have maps coming up that I think will help maybe illustrate some of that issue of which land is in the city and which land is in the port and so on. So we'll have more chance to look at that and comment on it in just a minute. But I do want to keep moving along through what we have to talk about on the economic side here. So this is where we're at in the process. We're doing the sort of technical pieces of analysis that all go together into the economic opportunities analysis, or EOA report. And once we have those sort of findings, technical findings, and then we'll be developing policies and strategies out of that. But we're still really in the midst of step one, which is getting the preliminary or first drafts of the technical analysis done so that we can refine them. This is the schedule that we're on. We are on track still on this for our planned calendar. Task 3 and task 4 is what I was talking about, kind of the technical analysis. We want to start wrapping up those drafts real soon and then finalizing that by the end of June. So we've got to just stay on task and get that done. But there should be draft report documents ready for you in the next couple weeks, and that'll provide a lot more information for review. And then we'll get into the next steps of figuring out what it all means and getting to the adoption. So the components of the EOA, just to review, these are sort of the basic format that the report ends up being in, but there's a statement of goals and objectives. This is part of what we talked about last time. This was part of what came out of the strategic planning process, which is great to have that done on the front end. And then there's sort of your local trends, which is a big part of what I'll be talking about today. Target industries, which we also did talk about last time, and then getting into that job forecast. So the 20-year forecast is what ends up really driving the finding for how much land the city is going to need for employment uses, both commercial and industrial, over the next 20 years. And that's kind of the main sort of takeaway finding of this process in terms of the state planning process. So that's what we're trying to arrive at, is how much job growth will the community have and how much land need that translates into. And then we compare that to the land inventory that Andrew will be talking about, and that is the report. So I just want to talk a little bit about what we're finding in terms of numbers so far, what the employment breakdown looks like there in Boardman. So what we find is that you're approaching 3,500 jobs in Boardman. That's actually more jobs than your local workforce. It's not more than your population, but then sort of the employed sector or the employed component of your population. So you have, between Boardman and the port and all those industrial areas, a large employment base there in the community. A large share of it, over 40%, is manufacturing, and in this case that's really referring to food manufacturing. So that's the food processing, packaging, turning the raw agricultural products into packaged and processed foods. So that is a major chunk of your local employment. Then that's followed by transportation and warehousing, and utilities. These are all lumped together in the standard sort of breakdown of industrial sectors. It's kind of a weird combination of things, but in the case of Boardman, you really have both. You have good representation of employment in utilities. A lot of that is Portland General Electric and the power companies you have there. And then you also have good representation in transportation and warehousing. A lot of that is related to the food processors who are running distribution and warehousing for their businesses. So they have a separate class of employment that's categorized as that. And then you have sort of smaller shares of really all the other employment sectors. In this case, we're getting information from the state on sort of your actual local businesses and employment levels. We have to keep that anonymous, but when they provide that, it's always like a couple years old. And so for the information sector, which includes data centers, we've had to do a little bit of estimation on the jobs that have been added in the data center industry in Boardman over the last couple of years. But we come up with an estimate of 170 roughly jobs. And so that has grown very quickly. It is still not one of your largest sectors, but it's certainly one of your fastest growing sectors, because every time you add a facility like that, it's going to pump up your numbers. This is I should point out, this is an estimate of employment in Boardman's city boundaries. And so it does not include some of the major employers that are mixed in there with, right next door to you, but are on port property and outside of the city boundaries. So we're really trying to capture just what's happening in the city itself. So that
Does that
is
include,
a breakdown
does
of
that-
your sectors.
that
Yeah,
include
are
the
there any questions
security,
on-
the security people of the data centers?
It would somewhere in there. I'm not sure. So Brenda, the question is about the security, the first coast security workers that work for the data centers, the Amazons. Would they be captured in that information at 5%, or would they actually land someplace else?
I do know that some of that is being captured under administrative services here, which is why that sector is so big. So I think there are a few local companies that, it seems to me, are probably serving the data center industry in Boardman and beyond. And they're being caught under administrative services. The number under information is an estimate kind of based on all the employment on site. So that does capture other things. It captures the people doing the maintenance and taking care of the grounds and providing security and some other things. That's a good question. I haven't thought necessarily if there's redundancy or double counting going on there, but I can think about that and look into it. I don't think it would be much.
And just so I'm clear, we're told there's 8,000 jobs in this area. You're showcasing 3,400 of them.
So the balance of that, so yeah, the port's numbers the port indicates that they have created about 8,500 jobs. So what this is capturing is the employment within the city. So that number of 3,400 is capturing the Lamb Weston jobs, it's capturing the one data center that's inside the city limits. But it's also then capturing the employment at the schools. So that 3,400 is our teachers that are at the 3 schools.
So for the manufacturing, it's really just Lamb Weston.
It's Lamb Weston. It's not Boardman Foods because you're not in our city limits. It's not Tillamook. So it's Lamb Weston, Oregon Potato, one data center.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got it.
Yep.
That's good. Thank you.
And we can talk more as we go through the process about this blending of the city with the port. If it's valuable to think of it in a different way, we can definitely explore that.
It is for me, just because I think a lot of the services, the port, whether people are going to lunch or bringing in gas to the businesses, if you're looking at it, it's really a connect.
Right. I think a lot of times, for those of us who live and work here, we don't think about that arbitrary city limits line. We think about the city and the services that the cities provide. And yes, we're kind of the commercial, we kind of provide those commercial level services, grocery store, other retail, restaurants. And then as much as we do have kind of port activities inside the city limits, we also think of those as port activities. And I put that in air quotes for a reason, because there is an arbitrary line that sits there in the middle of that that says, well, this portion's in the city and this portion.
That's what I'm looking at. This is a much bigger number if. Damn that.
Right. And I think it is important, for us to understand the difference between this total employment number at 3,400 versus the employment. Says they have 8,500 jobs. They're not counting the grocery store, the teachers, they're not counting those things. So it is important to understand the differences or what their number is. There's some overlap, those lovely Venn diagrams with the circles with the overlapping, there is an overlap in there, but there are also clear distinctions between them. So yeah, Brendan, there may be value, at least at the explanatory level, to talk about the difference between our 3,400 number and the port's number of 8,500.
Okay. Yeah, let's think about that some more and we can get that into the report. At least we could just provide a profile of what the sort of combined employment ecosystem is like. We need to remember that, a specific purpose of this report is to look at the city's urban growth boundary. And so that's at the end of the day, we do need to use that as kind of our basic unit. But we can think more about that. So looking at firms, on the left is a comparison of the firms and organizations, employers in Boardman compared to national trends and the size of those firms, and they match up pretty well. But the main takeaway and important to remember is that in any community, most businesses are small businesses of 5 or fewer employers. Many are a single person. And so that's really what business looks like. But then, of course, if you do have some larger employers of, 200, 500 people, that is obviously still makes up a very large segment of your overall employment picture. In terms of commuting, so you have, as I referred to, you sort of have more people commuting in to work the jobs in Boardman than you have leaving, because there are more jobs there than the workforce. So, but this is just an estimate that we get from a census data set. So roughly 650 people, both living and working in Boardman. And then you've got most of the local workforce is commuting in, and then a large chunk of local residents are commuting out to work elsewhere. This is very common in any region that has a lot of overlap and nearby communities. It's just kind of how people live and work. So, but in terms of commuting, people are going to work in the places you would most expect, I think, Hermiston, Pendleton, the rest of, Morrow and Umatilla counties, and then some folks commuting, quote unquote, to Portland or Salem. Probably those are a lot of people who are working remotely. So, and then in terms of people who are coming in, they are working, they're commuting in mostly from nearby. So the rest of Morrow County, Umatilla County, and then some from the Tri-Cities area. But you have a strong jobs worker balance, as I implied. So you've got basically 1.5 jobs for every worker in Boardman. So more jobs than workers. And that's a lot of communities we work with would really envy that situation. So you've got that strong amount of employment. But as we talked about at the last meeting, then that opens up other issues with housing and things that come with having so much employment there. And then a quick overview of what you're looking at in terms of your jobs and industries. We talked about what your largest industry sectors are, your largest relative to national trends. This is another measure we look at, sort of where you're strongly represented locally compared to what that share of employment is nationally. So food processing, utilities, agriculture, and the transportation. But the fastest growing in the community have been processing, and then construction and information. So those are two that aren't showing up necessarily yet as your biggest employment sectors, but they have been fastest growing. And construction is a really important one to remember as we talk about the growth in the data center industries, which is the information. So with that, that is oh wait, I haven't even gotten into the forecast yet. So that's a look at your current employment profile. So we're going to get into the forecasts over the next 20 years. And we have prepared preliminary looks at that. So as we discussed last time, the state statute for how to do this type of analysis lets you use what are called safe harbor approaches, meaning that if we use those numbers, that's a methodology the state just accepts and won't be too controversial. Those two ways of going about it are to either use a sub-market jobs forecast from Oregon Employment Department, or the population growth forecast that comes from PSU, Portland State University. They do that for the entire state, and the state government recognizes that as official population forecast. So in this case, the population growth forecast for Boardman is a little faster, more robust growth rate than the sub-market forecast. So the population growth forecast is 0.85%. So we accepted, or we took that as sort of your baseline, the population growth forecast. And that's is going to help us produce a baseline growth scenario, which I'll show you in a minute. But then we have the opportunity to do an adjusted growth forecast. And this is also an accepted part of the process. But it means that we are taking all the discussion that we have with you and the deeper understanding that we've developed through this process of what's really happening in Moro and Umatilla County, which a big part of that is data centers. So we're integrating all that knowledge and doing an adjusted forecast, which takes some more explanation, but is still acceptable way to go about this. So as you will see in a moment, we have done a preliminary adjusted forecast. We still need to get feedback, and we can still adjust all this. But looking at what it might look like if the growth exceeds that baseline, and in particular in a couple of industries we have our eyes on. So, and this is what that looks like. So the PSU population forecast, if we just apply that growth rate over 20 years and say employment's going to grow at the same rate as population, you know, we have this many jobs right now for this population, and we just kind of want to model it to grow at the same rate. That would mean 635 new jobs in Boardman. And again, that growth rate was 8.5% annually. But then we get to the adjusted forecast. And so this is really an important part of this process, and what we're going to have to keep talking about through the process is, what does that adjusted growth forecast look like? What do we want to assume in terms of growth and desire from the community to attract data center development? Excuse me. And what will that mean? So as you see on the right, this is a comparison of the two scenarios, the baseline and the adjusted. And in the middle, you see in the adjusted forecast, the very large, much greater growth assumed in the information sector to capture the addition of multiple data centers in the Boardman community going forward. So that adds much more employment in that sector over the baseline. That also means significant more employment in construction in particular. And then also, we use a model that looks at the amount of economic activity, what we call indirect and induced economic activity from all of this investment, especially in the data centers. So that really large amount of investment and new economic activity happening in the city generates additional jobs and activity in all of the other sectors to help serve that new growth. And so you see in that case growth across all the other sectors, much less than you see in information and construction, but it all adds up to really a significantly larger jobs forecast, approaching 1,500 new jobs in the community over 20 years, which would be growth of 42% in your employment base. So, and that's a lot to take in. And I know a large difference between those two forecasts. So I want to pause there and I want to answer any questions about that analysis and obviously start to get your thoughts on what that means, what that would look like to have that significantly higher growth forecast. Maybe
So
we'll-
Brendan, Brendan, this is Carla. I want to mess around a little bit with your healthcare number.
Okay.
Earlier today, Good Shepherd Healthcare System, which of course is the hospital in Hermiston, released a public press release. And I'll just start it. It's fairly short. It's on their website. Good Shepherd Healthcare System is excited to announce the acquisition of 61 acres of land located on Main Street in downtown Boardman, Oregon. This property will be the future location of a healthcare facility, providing needed outpatient services for the residents of Boardman and surrounding communities in Morrow County. As part of Good Shepherd's commitment to enhancing healthcare accessibility, a new facility will allow Good Shepherd to deliver state-of-the-art care in Morrow County. Quoting, "This development is a testament to our ongoing mission to provide compassionate and exceptional care close to home, meeting the needs of our growing community," unquote, says Art Matheson, Good Shepherd CEO. Quoting again, "Purchasing this land in Boardman positions us well to expand services for our Morrow County patients, ensuring they have access to the most essential healthcare services right in their own community." And it goes on from there. Before stepping into this meeting, I left a meeting with two of the principals from Good Shepherd. At 61 acres, but probably a quarter to a third of it will be for a future medical campus. They anticipate that the campus will develop in phases, as will the property. I learned some really interesting statistics in this meeting. 20% of the hospital's patients come from here, and not just exclusively Boardman, but Boardman, Oregon, and the counties surrounding here. So they're looking at this investment strategically rather than continuing to invest in the Hermiston campus. They see this as being able to invest into another campus in Boardman and providing closer to home services for 20% of their clients that they already have.
Great.
I also learned that in Hermiston, they own a number of homes and apartments. And they have, that's one of their recruitment mechanisms, is that they provide kind of that, come work for us, we can provide you transitional housing until you're able to find a house to live in. So I think he said 10 houses and some 70 apartments they own there in Hermiston. And they also, the area around the campus, they've worked to make sure that there are good connections between their uses and the adjoining uses. So they're sited next to the View Park, which is where the aquatic center is and those types of things. I know that they worked with the city around property acquisition for that when that all happened, gosh, 20 some years ago. So it was a really interesting conversation. They obviously have a lot of work in front of them as far as developing this campus and what they're gonna do. But for the city, it's exciting because the ownership has shifted. And we now have a property owner there that will actively work to develop that property. That does not mean we're gonna have a hospital in 6 weeks or 6 months. But it does mean that over the next several years, we will see any number of things happen on that property. So they also indicated they thought 100 jobs here in Boardman, not immediately, but again, over time. So I'm blowing your healthcare numbers out of the water, Brendan. It's not just a few, it's another 100. So I don't know how that mixes with the rest of your numbers there, but I just haven't been in a position where I can really share this we've been knowing this is in the works for a while, and it's really exciting that press release came out today. I think for this meeting, it was really timely.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And yeah, we can just add that right in. That's no problem.
Yep.
And do you have, with Sage Center, going to adding that event center and the 500 space there, I know that people are talking already, about more hotels. And so is that leisure and hospitality taken into consideration stuff that's...
Where's leisure and hospitality? Near the bottom. Okay, so leisure and hospitality kind of reflective of healthcare. The numbers are very similar. So, we've approved in the last 2 years, we've approved 2 new hotels. One on this side of the freeway, in the southwest quadrant, and then another one in the northwest quadrant of the Main Street interchange. And we're anticipating an application for another hotel along northeast front. I don't know what's going on with the hotel that's in the northwest quadrant, but I do think that the hotel in the southwest quadrant and the hotel in the northeast quadrant will both get built. So the one in the southwest quadrant that's had an approval for a while, we continue to work on the street infrastructure for that particular one. It's a Hilton product. They've said that much publicly. I'm not gonna, I have some other insight, which east literally next to the new parking lot, the Sage Center expansion parking lot. That one is proposed at, an extended stay. So they'll each be a suite. So they'll be kind of the room with the mini kitchen and then the sleeping space. So I'm excited. I think both of those hotel projects will move forward. It'd be interesting to see who starts construction first, but I think they're targeting very different markets. And so so yeah, I think the other part of leisure and hospitality is, I just keep hoping that we start seeing some more restaurants. Jennifer's on here. She's our planning commission member and she owns the C&D. We have a Burger King coming to town. I think there's a couple other fast food options that could be looking at Boardman. A nice sit-down restaurant would be great. So yeah, that leisure and hospitality, I think there's some things happening that could really affect that number as well. I don't know how much of that 20, I think if that's 0 to 100, how much of that 20 that's the growth there is no growth, or if what we keep doing with restaurants and hotels will continue to drive that number as well.
Yeah, that's an
Brendan
excellent
point. Yeah, Brendan's always very conservative with his numbers.
Okay.
No, that's an excellent point and reminder. So I will have another look at that leisure and hospitality category.
And I would ask about construction. So from what I understand, there's about 200 people always here in construction and times more than that. And so are these jobs of construction companies that actually, you know, the owners live and work, you know, and they're based here?
Good
Or-
question.
Because construction to me is a lot of workers that live here at least Monday through Friday.
Right, and so that's a really good question. Is that capturing? It's clearly not capturing the current number of construction workers. The question is it capturing the number that are already here, that are living at the River Lodge or living in an RV? And then what does that growth look like? And of course, we are looking at the difference between population growth forecast here and a scenario with that adjusted forecast. This is less about who's already here and more about who could come.
Okay.
So,
Right, this is gross. This isn't showing the current amount.
Okay.
Yep, but
Well,
I do think that that's another, there we go, there's our construction.
Because what I hear is that
Seven for construction.
there's no end in sight to having these at least 200 construction people
Right, and
living amongst us.
that would be interesting to understand where that 87 under construction is coming from, because that's certainly under what we believe. But is that capturing those firms that are work here and their employees work out of Boardman? Is that capturing the Boughtons and the others who are working these big projects? And again, some of those big construction projects are not inside the city. They're at the port. So think about where they are as well. Again, that imaginary line, that's the difference between, is it on this side of the UP line or is it on that side of the UP line? That side over there.
So when you were, if I take you said something about Burger King. So I'm imagining that they're trying to take in the numbers from everywhere, right? They wouldn't be just taking these numbers to decide, or freeway traffic or something. So maybe there's some data that people have collected that's can be tied into this, even though you have to keep it separate. I get it.
Right, right. One of the things I can tell you is that I was had a conversation with a company who sells data. And they looked at just the Main Street interchange, you know, from like just north of Boardman Avenue to just about Oregon Trail Boulevard. And one block each way. And they captured that and they looked at a 1-year time frame. And in 1 year, there were almost 200,000 discrete captures of phones. So in order to be captured, you had to be in that space for more than 10 minutes. So it's not capturing the people that are driving under the bridge. You have to be in that space for at least 10 minutes. And if you're in there every day, like you and I might be, you get counted once. You don't get counted every time you're there. Once you're counted, they capture your number. And this is all done by when you sign up for apps, you say, yes, you can capture where I'm at. And so they're using that app information to capture that. And the number was just under 200,000, but you might as well say there were 200,000 discrete stops in that 2-block north-south range over a 1-year period. That's for a Burger King, that's a pretty good number. Yeah.
Gotcha.
So yeah, I just wanted to point out for construction, for instance, what that is counting is firms that, companies that report being based in Boardman and their employment. So it's not catching residents who may live there and be working for companies that are doing work outside of Boardman, or the companies are not based in Boardman. So it's that difference between really trying to count the number of jobs that are located there versus the jobs that the residents themselves are holding down. And they're really kind of two different things if you remember that commuting graphic. So hopefully that makes sense. I just want to point that out. But if you have reason to think that that construction number is still low for firms that are actually registered in Boardman, then, you know, we can look at that too.
I don't think many of them are.
No, I think you've probably captured, I think that's right, because the big ones aren't housed here. They're not they don't have headquarters here, so that number is probably right.
Okay.
But as you've noted with the alternative forecasts, maybe there's an additional growth that happens with the construction there for new firms that might be located in Boardman itself.
Right.
Yeah.
One thing that this anticipates, we found something similar in Hermiston, is that for everything related to these data centers, you need to start planning for many more of the folks who work with them to want to be located there locally and not driving from the Tri-Cities or wherever, whatever's happening now.
Yeah.
All these vendors, all these folks who work on the construction and then provide services to them are all increasingly going to be located there in Morrow and Umatilla County.
Yep.
So I'm just looking at the clock. I want to make sure we have time, a lot of time to look at the maps here. So I want to move on to that, and as we do that, we can have more of this discussion. But just real quick review. What we're going to do is take.
You can. All right.
Right.
That's been going on for years.
Right. We need more construction workers to help do the other stuff. Yep.
I'm sorry, I missed some of that because you're cutting in
we
and
were
out
just,
just a little
we
bit.
were just, yeah, I think we froze. We were just saying that it's hard to even find somebody to put a fence in for you because they're so busy with the Amazon contract. So,
Right, yeah.
yeah.
And it's not like it went away. It continues. It's sustainable. I mean, like,
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So the real quick, what our next step is to take those jobs forecasts and then we sort of convert that into a need for physical real estate to do the employment and translate that into a need for land with the proper zoning for either commercial or industrial use. So that's the next step we'll be doing. I don't have those numbers yet, but we'll be talking about that next time. But once we get that land need, then we're comparing that to the land inventory, which is what we want Andrew to talk about. So I'm going to kick it over to him and we'll get into the maps.
All right, thank you, Brendan. This is a slide that I believe was talked about last time. We're basically looking at all of the land in the urban growth boundary of Boardman and trying to select just employment lands. We're taking out things that are wetlands or floodplains or water bodies and trying to focus on things that are just developable pieces of land. And we wind up with a figure that's kind of the net buildable acres after some assumptions about, big pieces of land require new infrastructure and road rights of way, things like that. So this is kind of the funnel of looking at the land that we do here. And so I've got a couple of maps on the next slides to go over some of this information. Next slide, please. So we're working with the city's zoning map and comprehensive plan designation maps. We're really focusing on the things that are not residential. There's a couple of mixed use designations that seem to be pretty developed out as residential, so we're ignoring those as well. But for this effort, yeah, focusing on employment land. Next slide. And this gets to some of your questions about having a map that kind of identifies what's available for future employment. I think the one on the next slide here starts to get to that point. So this is the constraints we're looking at. We have information about wetlands in Morrow County from the National Wetlands Inventory. We've got water bodies identified in the Morrow County GIS. There's 100-year floodplain data here. So this kind of just shows that we are accounting for these areas. And as of our latest version, we're not assuming that any development is really feasible in these areas. Next slide. Yeah, here's the land type here. So the things in blue are basically employment land. There's a bit of mixed use land there and residential land that we're talking about. And then things that are kind of owned by federal and state agencies, we're mostly ignoring, but there might be a reason to include them if it makes sense. but we're really looking at the lands that are in blue here. That's our focus. Next slide. So we've taken a first cut at the development status, they call it. So what's vacant, what's developed, and what's kind of in a squishy in-between area called partially vacant. Things that might have some either physical land or that's still kind of available to be developed on, or that might be appropriate for redevelopment if there's, you know, some small low value use on it currently. So I believe that this map reflects some of the information that Matt and Brendan received as they did some touring of the area when they were out there recently. And I do have a kind of an online version of this map that we can look at and zoom in on and talk about specific properties. And that might be a good use of say 15 minutes of our time here as we do this. And I believe we may have shared a link to this map that I'm going to throw on the screen. But if we didn't, then we can get this to you all shortly here. So let me just show. So this is a map that lives online. We've got our constraints layer and kind of this red hatch mark here.
I'll need you to share here.
Yeah, am I sharing or am I?
Yeah.
I've got it. Yep.
Yep. Yeah, I just took over here, Brendan. Sorry.
Gotcha.
So the red hatch marks are the things that we showed in that constraints layer, and then I can turn on the other layer here. So the red things are developed lands, the green things are vacant lands, and the yellow things are partially vacant. There's a couple of things that I wanted to kind of zoom in and note. If you have this map on your own computer, you can zoom in and it'll give you like the actual parcel address here. And just I was saying that giving kind of feedback on this kind of information is it's probably easiest if you just tell us which parcels you're looking at, or take a screenshot and then just send us an email and we can use that to revise. But this area here, there's the cemetery, and then I think a lot of this land is owned by the cemetery, or at least it's showing
All
up
of
in my
it.
data. All of it, yeah. So
All
that's
of it's
why
Olson Road. Mhm.
that's why it wasn't included before, because it looks like it's just cemetery land, but there are clearly some industrial uses on the site. So we can talk
Yep.
about how much of that might be, you know, actually for future development, and how much of it might be for future cemetery uses. You know, does the cemetery want to expand, you know, to cover this whole area? Probably not.
Nope.
So there's some amount of that will include. And then as you look at the aerial, yeah, there are some things that seem to have been either developed recently or for one reason or another are not showing up as developed in the data. So nonprofit uses are often things that show up as having no improvement value, which is something we use. But if you click on an individual parcel, you'll get a pop-up here that will say, you know, what's the lot number, what's the zoning designation, is it in the city limits, and yeah, so this has an improvement value of 0, which is why it was flagged as vacant, but clearly there's something on it, so we shouldn't include that as future development capacity. So we're not, you know, this isn't a polished draft. We're kind of in process here of identifying how much land is available. But as Brendan mentioned, once we feel confident in our assessment of these properties, we will create a kind of a comparison to the land need, and then we can start to say, okay, well then you either have land to meet this future need, or you need X amount of land of this type to meet that need. I'm just looking at the aerials. I'm seeing another, you know, this is a substation. That's something else that often doesn't show up in the data, but that's something we should call developed. So if there are particular kind of spots that seem anomalous to you, we can talk about those, or I can give you plenty of time to review this on your own, whatever you and Brendan think is appropriate for where we are in the schedule right now.
I personally want to be protective of our time today and make sure we get through the agenda. But if Jennifer or Debbie in particular have anything that jumps out at them, I'd like them to have the opportunity to have a conversation now. Because Andrew, you and I can come back and refine this, you know, over the phone at some point, sharing a screen. So I saw some things that are red flags, but I don't want to waste the time today. I'd rather hear from Jennifer or Debbie, or anybody else that's Gary or Ryan DeGroff if they have questions.
And if folks want to look at this on their own, I think this link that I just dropped into the chat should work for you.
Yeah.
This is Gary. I'm really impressed with the mapping. I'm looking forward to getting some enlargements in my hands and be able to see it a little bit more. But the whole comparison of between vacant and occupied, and if it's vacant, is it truly vacant, and how does that compare with growth, is something that I'm keenly interested in.
Me too, and I'm not on it because I'm here in person, so if there's a way to email it to me, that'd be great.
Yeah, I'll make sure that I email, Andrew, maybe, you can send me that link, after the meeting, and I can send it out to the PAC folks to go in and take a look.
Yeah.
Yep, that'd be great.
And I'm also wondering, like, is there easements or electrical lines or utility things that make it to where you can't build on it? You know, that you need to cross those out or.
Right, so one of those that I'll reach out and share with Andrew, but I'll just state now, where you have South Main Street there and you've got the green property on the north side, so now comes, bring your cursor south. There you go. Okay, so where it says
Yep,
Oregon
there-
Trail Boulevard in South Main, the
Yeah.
property on the north side of Oregon Trail Boulevard, there is a BPA easement that runs all the way through town east to west. And so, well, you're gonna see that the city owns that.
Mhm.
It's not buildable because it has 3 BPA lines that run east to west all the way through
Yeah.
town. So and that's just
Yeah,
one
does
of-
that cover the entire property, or is that kind of a portion of it?
Well, that property is going on the east side. We just did a partition. On the west side, we're just finishing up a subdivision. They've not been recorded yet, and it's going to more clearly delineate what's
Okay.
under the transmission line and what's not. But
Yeah, if you
I
have
can work
a
on that.
PDF of that, yeah, that subdivision, I can kind of fake it in,
Yep.
or if you have the actual GIS, I can use that as well.
Yep.
The other question is like, does some of the companies that you talked about, like the cemetery, but is there companies that have options or something for expansion that property may not be developed, but it's kind of earmarked for something already? Is there a way to know that, or?
In some cases, yes, and in some cases, no. So like the cemetery property in particular, we know that the cemetery wants to retain their cemetery and then kind of the balance, doubling that size. So that one parcel, the larger parcel there in the cemetery property, we know they want to retain that for future. But the rest of that, they have not, the cemetery district does not have a strong desire for development. So most of that's long-term leases at very, very little money. We're trying to work with them to have a real conversation about redevelopment of that whole, other than the cemetery, true cemetery, to have a real conversation about redevelopment of that land. So.
Yeah. And I think just from the state's perspective, the future development, like, maybe it's not available for somebody to come and purchase, but if Amazon, let's say, wants to expand on a certain site, that still counts as future development. That still counts as meeting a future need. And so we call it vacant in this inventory, and we see that there's need for it in Brendan's forecasts, and so that's how they marry up. But I think in other communities, the state has said, unless there is a building permit or a certificate of occupancy or some kind of regulatory guideline that says, this is actually developed currently and does not meet future need, that's kind of the cutoff that we use.
Yep. Ryan, you have a question, comment?
Yeah, I do have a comment. I heard my name come up there. Thank you. I suspect there's nothing that Andrew and Brendan can do to take it off of your inventory, but another issue the city may want to be aware of and count for their own purposes are landowners who are either unwilling to sell or have a price set so high that nobody will buy it, which is effectively the same as not being for sale. I see that in a lot of communities where on a map it appears that you've got a lot of buildable land, but in reality you don't because somebody's farming it and has no intention of not farming it or thinks it's worth $1 bazillion and they're wrong. So it might be useful if the city is aware of those kinds of lots to just, make a note that, the net of what Andrew and Brendan map may be a little bit lower for landowners like that.
Yeah, and to that end, I would go back to Main Street a little further south. The one question that came up for me is you've got just a little further south than that. So when the colors show back, you had more colors on it a bit ago. So the farm field that it's kind of a square on 3 sides and a circle on one. It's almost 160 acres. That one was not colored before.
That may have
And
been
that-
in the other presentation, like one of the other maps.
Yeah, one of the earlier maps. It wasn't. What I would say, that one is in the city limits. It is zoned the northern half for residential use, the southern half for future urban. But those circles, there are 4 of them. There's a full circle, 2 small circles, and then a half circle. Yep, those two there are in the UGB. The large circle and then the half circle just below it are in the city limits, all owned by the same landowner, not that one. Those two. The large one to the east. And then the one below the large one, the half circle below. So that little circle is not a part of the same ownership.
Okay.
But there's 4 circles there, 2 smalls, a large, and a half circle that are all owned by the same landowner. And he's not interested in not farming. So again, the 2 smaller ones are in the UGB, but the large one and the half residential or future urban purposes. And he's just not. Now you're way out of the city now.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, the important thing is that for this process is keeping that distinction between employment land and likely
Yep.
residential land. So while all of these things are in play and important to remember, I don't think that any of this land down here to the south is all considered future residential right now, correct?
Yeah, all those circles are either currently zoned residential, whether county or city or future urban. So yes, the big circle was just like on that earlier map. It was like it didn't have any color on it, and that's what threw me. So
It was gray, I think.
Yeah, I flagged that as other. Why did that one wind up? Oh, it's half residential and half it looks like future urban. So yeah, those should be residential.
So I think this will be important as you get into the housing capacity analysis next year, to talk about those areas where if you have unwilling landowners, I think Brian was referring to this, is that you don't, according to DLCD, you basically still have to count the land. They say this is a 20-year look, and you have the land there, things might change, it might still become available and so on. So, but there is always the option of if it's a real barrier and obstacle and you simply don't think it's worthwhile to have that land showing up in your count of available land, then you can look at things like doing a UGB swap, taking it back out of the boundary, and things like that. So, because it's residential, that discussion might have to come a little further down the line. But yeah, sort of, I guess in answer to Ryan's point, we do still need to count those types of lands, regardless of landowners being recalcitrant or whatever, but it is important for the city to keep track of that for their own sake.
Yep.
And I
Yeah.
understand that some of the businesses that are here now, there was agreement signed saying that other business types cannot go in or near them or something like that. Talking about the dollar store particularly. So is that part of this or? Is that
No,
something different?
no, those are agreements between that business owner, that developer and the property owners that sell to them. So, I represented a property owner for that to happen. We pushed back and didn't do that. But not every landowner is able to do that. But no, we would not capture that. It's kind of like, are the residential counter to that or similar thing is when homeowners associations are created and they adopt covenants, conditions, and restrictions, we don't enforce those. We'd like to have a copy of them. We'd like to know what they are, but they are not our regulations. They're their regulations. So same kind of thing. If you sign something that says that you're going to restrict your own ability to market your property, that's on you. Yeah.
So there's been also talk in the community about property that's available for residential, but the property owners next to it believe that it's gonna take down their value, whatever is built there. So there's a whole area I don't understand at all, but is that something that you have to keep in mind when you're doing this planning, or is it just this land is, you can have, how, one house that's 12 stories high and it doesn't matter what any of the neighbors think? I mean, like, is that how that works? I'm not saying it's a good or bad thing. I just don't know, like, who gets to weigh in on what they want next door to them.
So some of that, Debbie, is honestly buyer beware. I mean, if you care, you should investigate that before you purchase and know what you're buying. But generally a zoning map is an adopted item. We're in the process now where we're doing all of this work and the zoning map may very well change. And so people should participate in the process to see what's happening. One of the things we're talking about is and again, this is an employment lands conversation. I'm going to use a residential example, but we're looking at removing the subdistrict so that residential uses are just simply residential uses. Currently, you can only do a manufactured home park in a place where we authorize manufactured home parks.
Did you get taken care of?
We can only authorize multifamily where it's zoned multifamily. It's kind of the same thing with industrial. We have light industrial, we have general industrial. And so those types of uses are specific, or same thing with commercial. We actually have like 3 or 4 different commercial zones.
Yeah.
So,
It's just for us. I mean, I get it, but I'm just wondering, how do you manage that when you're making decisions for the future? And I know Stanfield's had some conversations that I've sat in on some of their meetings, and the city council or whoever was making some of these decisions was like, no, everybody here wants 2-acre parcels. They want to have cows and chickens on their backyard. And when they went back and talked and showcased this kind of a map or whatever to people, they all changed their mind and said, no, we need to go higher because we don't want to have that sprawl. And we want, it was an eye opener for them.
right.
So I kind of see this process as something that helps bring awareness to, this is how much space we have. We need houses for people that work here. If we're going to have this tourism, we're going to have you know, these things we know are coming in our future, the people, you know, working in a hospital, they're gonna need a place to live.
Right,
And so
Right.
the reality is, we can't do it with everyone having 2 acres.
right. Cities can't afford, well, developers can't afford to install,
Yeah.
and cities can't afford to maintain
Right.
infrastructure at that low level of density. It really, and again, the city's missions are to create places for people to live and shop and work.
Yes,
The county is responsible for preserving farm and forest land.
okay. And that would be helpful. I mean, in your workings
Mhm.
is to help have those conversations that are meaningful enough that people can see it, right?
Right.
The layman,
Right,
and not feel that someone's, gonna put in a big development and it's gonna tear down my value of my home. That's crazy stuff. I think
yeah,
it can get crazy when it's just unknown what we're
Right.
talking about.
right. And it's the unknown that usually
Mhm.
scares people off. Yep.
But you guys have done this before, so I'm probably throwing out old stuff, but I appreciate you. listening.
The messaging of the information is certainly an important part of what we do.
Great.
For sure. Andrew, can you put that up just one more time?
Oh, sorry.
Um, I have my eye on the clock here. So, but just to kind of wrap this up, I did want to point out. So the main takeaway here is that this is our first look at what's vacant or partially vacant, and where you can accommodate more commercial and industrial uses. So we're gonna narrow this down some more. It's important to look at where you can see the sort of red cross hatching that shows where the constraints are. You know, this big chunk right in the upper middle there is not, it's green right now because technically it's vacant, but that's not going to end up counted as buildable because it's got water all over it. So there are those types of things. But I just want everyone to be aware that right now we're finding there are some parcels still, you know, interspersed in your industrial area, and that's part of the supply that you currently have to take on some of this land need that we'll be talking about. But also you don't have any extremely large parcels left. So as we get into talking about potential data center development, you're unlikely to have any remaining parcels that can accommodate the size of data center developments that are happening right now. So that would be kind of probably a finding in excess of the land you have. I want to just put that on your radar. So those are all the kind of things and some extra numbers that we'll have next time we come to talk to you. We'll start putting some numbers to
I'm
it.
sure you're also thinking about the infrastructure that you need to support those businesses with sewer, or I don't know, electricity, other things that you need space for, right? And what you already have capacity, maybe you have enough capacity already for all that in green, but maybe you don't, and then you'd have to save some of that space for the city's work itself.
Yeah, the water and wastewater project that was just completed based on the general obligation bond has provided a lot of capacity, but interestingly enough, our lagoon system, we've identified that since expanded in the last 2 years, we've seen an unaccountable increase in usage. So, I don't know, it's just all kind of crazy. So, yeah.
Okay. Well, we thanks, Andrew. I'll maybe put my presentation back up, look at some next steps here. So we've covered a lot today. We have still a lot to do, a lot to talk about. But you see the basic comparisons that we're getting to between job growth, land need, and land inventory. Next time around, we'll start talking about some of the potential actions or like, what does this mean? What can we do to address the findings? I'm not going to go through this today, looking at the time we have left, but these are just a sort of list or menu that we start with, and then we'll talk about what best applies to the findings and to the actual situation that we're finding in Boardman. The main thing is, do you have enough available land and sites left? And if you don't, what does that mean? How can communities remedy that once they have that finding? So these are just some of the stuff we'll talk about. We'll talk about how your current zoning map and development code do or do not meet the needs of the things we're talking about. And then some general recommendations on strategies for business development, workforce development, and things like that. So we will have more time to get into that next time, but that's just an overview. And our next steps will be to update the jobs forecast and buildable lands inventory and get you those actual technical documents. So again, hopefully we'll be able to do that in the next week or two. And then you'll have a lot more sort of technical analysis and stuff to read if you want to. And then get into those strategies and set up our next meeting to talk all that through. Do we have questions or comments or discussions on those next steps?
I have a lot of questions, but we're out of time.
That's good. Your questions are good ones, and they're generating a lot of discussion, so we really appreciate that. But I do think that's what we have for. I'm sorry,
I would
go
just
ahead,
say
Gary.
observationally, and I really appreciate being able to sit in today. Boardman's a really dynamic place, and that's going to keep going. And I think it's really healthy that everybody's having this discussion. I think that there's a critical, and you touched on it, Brandon, just a couple minutes ago, is there enough land for the growth projection? And it's a kind of a loggerhead or a catch-22 or whatever version of that you want to use. What are the what it sounds like there's some growth projections that aren't synced up between the port and the city and the county, and so that's an issue. But just to say that there are vacant lands, then come in some of the wetland issues. But more critical to development is, will the people part with their land that allows developers to do housing and make a profit? And I think that's kind of a huge issue that's marching towards Boardman. If I, was going to leave any kind of thought from my last few weeks of getting smarter about what's going on there.
Yeah,
You're
thank
so
you.
right. You're so right, Gary. And I think there's a lot of people, there's people here who remember the city movie and what a big thing that was from the river to here. And there's a lot of pride and there's a lot of ownership, and families coming back here and raising their grandchildren and stuff that maybe wasn't happening 20 years ago. And so it's a different climate for sure. And a lot of political as well as just a way of life controversy.
Mhm.
Yeah.
It is. Yeah, it is very dynamic. It's a very interesting project.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Any other comments or questions for the good of the order? Seeing none. Okay, we'll send out that link to that map right now, and if you guys please explore that and look around and send any questions or comments you have on any of this through Carla and myself, and we can always follow up with you on any of these issues. We appreciate your time and input today.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brandon.
All right, thanks
Thanks,
everyone.
Brendan. We'll catch you later.
Bye, Ryan.
Bye.